everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am so pleased to have with me on stage 3 attorneys with the ACLU who truly understand what's at stake in our country right now and are doing their very best to hold the line. We have Yasmin, Cader, Strangio, and Ben Wizner. And I could introduce your work to the audience, but I actually think it would be better if you could each just take a quick moment to introduce your work, what you oversee with the ACLU, so that we all have a grounding for the conversation to come. And Yasmin, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a broad and vast organization where we have a national presence and we also have affiliates in each and every state. My colleagues and I are part of the legal department, where we focus on 14 different issue areas, literally. And the focus of the work that I lead is in the context of racial justice and criminal legal system change. So everything from capital punishment to prison reform to racial justice across all sectors.
Chase?
Hi, everyone. Good to be here. My name is Chase, and I am co-director of the LGBTQ and HIV project, working on our docket at the national level on issues affecting the LGBTQ community.
And I'm Ben. I direct the ACLU Center for Democracy, which you could call the civil liberties wing of the ACLU, but it encompasses our work on free speech, privacy and technology, immigration, voting, national security, and human rights.
Okay, we have a lot to cover here. So let's get right into it. Last week, right-wing political activist Charlie Kirk was murdered at Utah Valley University. This week, we're seeing the Trump administration's response take shape. And what it looks like it's taking shape as is a crackdown on left-leaning organizations. Some organizations that have been mentioned are the Open Society Foundations, the Ford Foundation, maybe the Southern Poverty Law Center. We're also seeing lots of efforts to get public employees fired who might have criticized Charlie Kirk after his death. Ben, as somebody who directs the ACLU's First Amendment work, you've represented everybody from Edward Snowden to, more recently, Columbia student activist Mahmoud Khalil. What does this look like from your perspective? How concerned are you about the Trump administration's backlash?
Well, this is an innovation festival, so we should give credit where due. The Trump administration is being innovative in all the ways that it's trying to censor speech that it disagrees with. And the irony is, on Trump's first day in office, one of the many executive orders that he signed purported to prohibit federal government censorship. And since then, they have been the most aggressive censoring administration in modern history, at least. You could argue even more so than the McCarthy era, targeting every part of society that might be a center of dissent, from universities to actual law firms that represent their opponents, to students who had the temerity to write an op-ed criticizing US or Israeli policy. And now we have the vice president from his office announcing a campaign of retribution against some supposed left-wing conspiracy that has created terror cells to wreak violence against the right. Now, obviously, violence is not protected, and incitement to violence is not protected, but advocacy of violence is core First Amendment speech. And the vice president went to Yale Law School. He knows that the program that he announced from his office is completely unconstitutional, and even in this court system is not likely to be upheld in any way. What I do think is real is the cancellation campaign against anybody who said anything online that offends the sensibility of the right. The same people who decried cancel culture a few years ago are now very effective practitioners of it. The reality is that in the private sector, there's not a whole lot we can do about it. The Constitution doesn't protect you from your private employer. If you're a government employee, you do have a First Amendment right to speak on matters of public concern, and I do think that we're going to see many cases getting litigated of people who lose their government jobs for constitutionally protected speech.
You are outlining this vast sort of campaign of censorship that's reaching into, the New York Times being sued for $15 billion to, big law, and then obviously whatever J.D. Vance outlined yesterday. Even if some of these moves are not on solid legal standing, this intimidation is working. We saw big law cave sort of one after one in the spring. What does that add up to? And yeah, what does that
I
add
think
up to?
that is the point, right? I mean, for example, the executive orders targeting law firms were manifestly illegal. Every judge from across the political spectrum who's been presented with a case here has laughed at the administration's legal arguments and enjoined those orders right away. But it has chilled the legal profession. The lawsuits against the media are a joke. Suing the New York Times for $15 billion for its reporting. Now, the Times is not subject to the same kind of bullying as other organizations, both because it has resources and it's not trying to get a corporate merger like Paramount. But the message to the media is not we'll beat you in a lawsuit, but you'll have to defend against a lawsuit. And so many people in society don't have the resources to take that chance or don't have the incentive to want to take that chance. So if it's a corporation that has regulatory interests before the US government, why stick your neck out? If it's a law firm that might want to get contracts or clients, why stick your neck out? If it's a media organization that's owned by a corporation, again, why stick your neck out? And what we've seen on campuses across the country is certainly anyone who doesn't have a US passport has been terrified into silence by this campaign of arrests and imprisonment for political speech.
Chase, I'd love to get your perspective on the Charlie Kirk murder, but first let's start with kind of the lay of the land for rights for the transgender community. You made history last year by being the first openly transgender lawyer to offer oral arguments before the Supreme Court. This summer, the Supreme Court found against you in upholding the ban, Tennessee's ban against gender-affirming care for minors. What does that decision, the Scrimeti decision, what does that mean for the transgender community right now? What's sort of the lay of the land right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think to understand the Scrimeti decision, to understand this moment for transgender people, we have to look back to 2015 when the Supreme Court ruled in Obergefell v. Hodges that marriage equality was the law of the land. And from there, we saw this decade-long aggressive campaign to erode equality protections for LGBT people more broadly, and transgender people have been at the center of that. So it's not that it started yesterday, and it's not that it started with Scrimeti, it's that it started very strategically to undermine that major gain for LGBT people in 2015. And what we've seen from 2016 to 2020 was the rise of anti-trans bills in state legislatures. From 2020 to 2024, the rise of those bills focusing on trans youth and trans youth healthcare. And now what we're seeing is this massive legal and cultural campaign to equate transgender people with this ideology of a totally contrived transgender ideology, which is being utilized to demonize, surveil, and target transgender people, to chill our speech, to make us afraid, and in many cases, to cause people to try to leave the United States.
I mean, that effort seemed to concentrate last week. I mean, there was, when the Wall Street Journal sort of published that there was transgender ideology written on those bullet casings, it just felt like it became the tip of a spear being wielded against the transgender community. I guess, personally, do you have a response to sort of that moment? And how should we all respond to, protect people in our community that need protecting?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it has been a terrifying week, but I wouldn't say it really, was crystallized this last week. I think what we've seen over the last 8 months in particular is this effort to really eradicate the ability of transgender people to assert any legal protections under state law, in many contexts under federal law. And now what we're seeing is this effort to suggest that there is something called transgender ideology, that you could have something engraved on a bullet that was a transgender ideology. I mean, someone jokingly said, like, what did it say? Protect the dolls? Like, it doesn't, like, what does that mean? And of course, it doesn't mean anything. It is it doesn't actually sort of map on to anything specific, except to evoke this sense that there is something to abolish in our society, and that is equated with transgender people, because we are, in fact, human beings. And the more we are sort of conflated with an ideology, the more our existence, our material needs becomes the legitimate topic of debate.
So pulling back, what legal attacks are you anticipating against the LGBT community, in the coming months and years? I mean, is same-sex marriage on the table here?
Well, I mean, there's a petition before the Supreme Court right now to overturn Obergefell v. Hodges. So certainly I think that's, everything is on the table. And then of course, as Ben alluded to, there's also just the reality of how quickly people are chilled into censoring themselves, into not asserting their rights. We're starting to see, efforts to strip parents of custody, to investigate families. And so this is really the expansion of all of the different state apparatuses of violence that we see against so many communities, going even further in many different contexts. So I don't think anything is off the table. And also, we don't have to anticipate much because it's already happening right now.
Yasmin, changing gears, you lead the ACLU's racial justice work, and we've seen a retreat, I think some might say like a full-scale abandonment of DEI across corporate America. A lot of that was driven, it started after the Supreme Court decision regarding higher education, but then also the Trump administration's executive orders in the spring sort of seemed to escalate things. Companies like Google, Walmart, Meta, Target, Disney, they're all walking back, abandoning, stopping their DEI work. I guess if you could clear the air here, like in light of the Supreme Court decision and Trump's executive orders, if a company wants to create an equitable workplace, are they on a solid legal foundation right now to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that we distinguish between rhetoric and basic constitutional law and anti-discrimination law. And that we also fairly define DEI, which has a very broad umbrella, but to really to break it down to its core fundamental functions, which are basically good HR practices, right? And long before we had the terminology of diversity, which is a positive, of equity, right? Of the concept of inclusion, belonging, right? These are all positive workplace environment core fundamental principles. Before we had that, we had equal opportunity. We had, just and fair practices within the workplace. That's what this is around. And for anyone who works in HR, when you start talking about equitable practices, solid recruiting efforts, meritocracy, widening the pool, when you talk about these fundamental ideas and concepts, they're good business practice, and they're also ways in which companies are able to address and try to counter discrimination within their own entities and really inure themselves to being accused of or sued for discrimination. So when you look at it in that perspective, we're on very solid ground when we're not caught up into rhetoric that is seeking to catapult us backwards to a time from long ago, rhetoric that is seeking to erase certain identities. And when we don't get caught up into that, then we can really feel the solid ground underneath our feet.
I'll ask you a variation of the question I asked Ben. I mean, even though the ground is solid, the legal ground is solid, the intimidation and the threats appear to be working. Mm-hmm. So how would you advise companies to sort of navigate this moment?
Right. Two things. One of the things that Ben was talking about was like, this anticipatory capitulation that is happening in all these other industries. And, anyone who's ever had their lunch money threatened by a bully knows that if you easily give it up, that is not going to do well for you. But when you step back and you look at all of these industries that are impacted, or all these sectors, be it the media, be it academia, be it, our business community, what all of the success in those industries is standing on is a very secure, solid constitutional democracy, right? So constitutional democracy, the protection of civil rights and civil liberties, it isn't just for us as individuals as we go forth. It isn't just a moral calling. It's about the stability of a nation. And what we know, particularly for the corporate sector, right, is that stability promotes innovation, it promotes productivity, it promotes profitability. So we all have a stake right now in securing our constitutional democracy, whether your interest is your own individual liberty, whether your interest is the other people that you live in society with, who you care about as an individual yourself, or whether it's you as an institution that cares about the health of your sector. We all have a stake in it, and so if there's a need for, well, what do we do? What's the threat? self-interest. Self-interest is what we all can tap upon to secure our fundamental liberties and to secure our constitutional democracy and to not capitulate. It isn't good for us. It isn't good for us. It isn't good for us in any way, shape, or form.
And so I want to pause here to note that, you're at the Fast Company Innovation Festival. It's a room full of entrepreneurs, executives, business leaders. And we sort of touched on this in a variety of different ways already. But if you could just sort of stop and offer us some advice, what would you like to see each of you more of from corporate America that's not happening right now? Because we're seeing a lot of capitulation. And what would you like to see employees urging their companies to do? Because in the last decade, we've seen a lot of the movements that corporate America makes is driven by employees themselves. So Ben, or actually Chase, let's start with you, because when we did our pre-interview call, you did bring up, a number of years ago when North Carolina was pushing forward its HB2 bill known as the bathroom bill. Corporate America stood up. PayPal stood up, in defense of the transgender community. Where are they now? So if you want to take this question first, that would be great.
Yeah, as someone who works in state legislatures and lobbies against anti-LGBTQ bills across the country, the reality is that the single most powerful way to stop discriminatory legislation across the country is to have corporations lobby against those bills. And it is good for business to attract employees into states because those laws will protect their families, will protect their children. Right now, there are a lot of individuals who have trans kids, and you don't know when you're going to have a trans kid, and all of a sudden your state makes their healthcare a crime. Your state makes their healthcare a reason to investigate your family. There was a real investment in bringing innovation, bringing business into states across the country, and doing so by opposing legislation that was discriminatory. We've seen none of that over the last 7-8 years. It's had a huge impact on the legislative landscape across the country, and many people are leaving out of jurisdictions that aren't safe for their families. So I think people should push their companies to continue those efforts. I think it makes a huge difference. I think there's very good reason to believe that individuals are not going to come and you're not going to retain talent if you are not pushing back against that type of legislation at every level. And we're seeing it obviously in all sorts of places, including school boards and obviously at the level of the federal government.
Ben, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I will. And again, if you think that things are more or less normal or within the band of normal in this country over the last 8 months, I'm not speaking to you right now. I'm speaking to people who have a deep sense that something is off the rails and are not quite sure whether or how they can act to oppose it individually or within their institutions or companies. And I think, one of the rules that we learn from other countries that have experienced democratic backsliding, and that's a fair description of what's happening here, is you can't give the leader power that he doesn't actually have. Trump is acting like he's in a system that gives him unlimited power. That's not actually true. And so, again, I'll go back to the law firm example. He doesn't actually have the power to say that this law firm can't enter federal buildings, can't get contracts because I disagree with some of the positions that they took. And every court has said that. But if law firms are so worried about getting an order like that they go and sign an agreement to do things they're not required to do, you've just handed him the power to do that. Similarly, if media companies start writing checks to Trump's presidential library because they think that that's going to, make things quieter for them. Again, you're just creating an environment where the president has that power over the press. And you can see this sort of, you don't know when it's going to come for your sector exactly. But just know that we're all going to be judged for what we did and didn't do during this incredibly important time in our country's history. And think about how you want to tell that story 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. If you had an opportunity, either, again, individually or collectively, to oppose this. And I will just say, again, one of the other benefits of solidarity is that it works. We're all anticipating attacks on the nonprofit sector, and in advance of that, nonprofits of many ideologies across many sectors have gotten together to say that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Whereas if you allow them to pick organizations or issues off one by one, it's almost impossible to resist.
My turn?
Yes, your turn.
Okay. What I'd ask is, when you first asked me the question about DEI, and you noted and rattled off all of the abandonment and retrenchment, There's also been some real amazing examples of people standing strong. And when they, institutions and companies, and when they do so, what we hear is this. We hear the data that says, over 83% of C-suite executives say, what are you talking about? DEI is key to retention. You see the statistics across generations of employees saying, what are you talking about? This is why I want to stay here. So I feel that that corporate America has such a unique platform and opportunity to not have to punch back in a counterattack, but just say, what are you talking about? This works. We've seen it work. One of my favorite stories, I shared this with you earlier, is from a writer who produced a really famous television show, Lost, and then went on to do another famous television show, which I can't remember the name of, about the Tulsa Massacre. You remembered it? Remember?
No, I can't.
Okay, you know the one. But anyway, it was like a fictionalized modern-day Tulsa Massacre show. And he talked about how in the first writer's room that he ran, he said it was great, it was easy. Everybody looked like me, everybody thought like me, we all had our same jokes and our same experiences, and it was fun, it was great. And then I wanted to mix it up because I'm talking about the Tulsa Massacre, right? And so I'm bringing in all these different people from different backgrounds, Black people, gay folks that I hadn't necessarily had in my room before. And guess what? It was really hard, which I think is an important admission. It was hard because everybody didn't agree with me. We didn't have the same inside jokes. But guess what? It was the best thing I ever did, and most importantly, and this is for everybody here, the best product I ever made. And so when we make the business case, which is not hard to do, what we know is, what are these practices that we vowed to? Was it a black square on Instagram? No. What it did and what it resulted in was innovation, sharper decision making, productivity, all the things, right? All the things, all the KPIs. So what I'm hoping for is that folks just step back and say, what are you talking about? This works.
We're still waiting for Target to change their mind, and they've seen their foot traffic down since they rolled back DEI, and they have not changed their minds yet.
But that raises a really good point, which is the extraordinary boycott campaign, grassroots boycott Target campaign that began really organically in Black churches. So let's not forget the power.
So the ACLU has a history of anticipating what Trump is going to do, and you did a good job, sort of, right out of the gate with the first Trump administration. This year they gave you a little help with Project 2025, so you had their manual. Even so, you're looking, a year or two out in ways that I feel like we're all, living in this whirlpool right now. Can you tell us what you see on the horizon that's giving you concern? And Ben, I'd like to start with you, because on our pre-interview call, you pointed out that really the money that's flowing from the big, beautiful bill to ICE is going to be profound. Can you explain sort of what's
I will.
happening there?
Before I do that, I want people to understand that our legal strategy of resisting some of these policies has been, I think, more successful than people realize. The institutions have been a little stronger than Trump expected. We filed more than 80 lawsuits against Trump policies since inauguration. And in the cases where we've sought injunctions from courts, in 3/4 or more of those cases, we're getting those injunctions, and they're following them, with the exception of some high-profile mischief. I do think that litigation has been an effective tool. Now, what am I worried about? One of the reasons I think why Trump wants to deploy National Guard into American cities is because, unlike fascist dictatorships, Trump doesn't control the police in this country. Almost all the police in this country report to their local governments, to state governments, and not to the leader himself, who fashions himself the person who they should be reporting to. And so it's a sense of the limitations on his power and his frustration. But the so-called big, beautiful bill is pouring $170 billion into ICE. And we will see the creation of something close to a federal police force. We've never had that before. I mean, the FBI is a federal police organization, but it's smaller than the New York Police Department. And it doesn't, police ordinary crimes. Now it doesn't seem to police any crimes. But Trump will now have a substantial federal law enforcement organization that more or less reports to him, and that's not something that we've really seen in this country. Now, they will be bound by the Constitution, but they seem to, prefer to ask forgiveness than to ask permission, and so I do think we're going to see a lot more police abuses.
Yasmin, you have done a lot of work on sort of trying to dismantle the effects of the prison industrial complex that was built up by the war on drugs. Do you sort of see parallels here, or potential parallels?
Well, we're certainly more than parallels. We're seeing, a real extraordinary regression in terms of catapulting us back to those times, and even, times before then. We're seeing the increased use of vagrancy statutes and criminalization of criminalizing homeless people, or just criminalizing people for loitering and things like that. What I'm anticipating, in addition to what may come from as Ben says, these shenanigans, what I'm also anticipating is state and local actors also sometimes, seeking to mirror some of these policies. The criminal legal system is vastly a state and local run system. And so there's tremendous power that state and local officials have, and state legislators have, to either, increase the footprint of criminalization or to decrease it. So I don't want to say necessarily that I'm going to see it go only in one direction. I think there's a moment of reckoning right now, and a moment of opportunity for all of those individuals across the spectrum, the political spectrum, who all said, mass incarceration doesn't make sense. We don't want this for our country. It is not fiscally sound. It is not morally sound. We are wasting all this human potential. I think there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity for those folks to hold strong. So I don't know whether they will, but if they do, we all need to make sure that we are there to support that.
Chase, what are you watching that's not on our radar yet?
I mean, I will say that I am most concerned when it comes to particularly trans people, all LGBT people, about the rhetoric and the coercive threats that are coming out of this administration. And so when it comes to what we've seen from day one from the Trump administration, it's been, threats to pull federal funding to LGBT, art, to hospitals that provide healthcare to trans individuals, expanded use of criminal law, even, federal criminal statutes to attack LGBT people. And even if they don't ultimately have the authority, even if the judiciary is a block, at least when it comes to district courts, it is having a chilling effect. It is making people more scared to go seek medical care. It is making people more scared to speak out. And that is gonna have a huge impact on all aspects of our society. And now what we're seeing is this continued effort to equate transness with criminality. And that is something we've seen in our history. We had criminal, cross-dressing statutes for a long time. Transness was deemed deviant as criminal, and that's what we're coming back to. And the consequences of that are not going to stop with trans people. And so I think we have to follow the rhetoric as much as we follow the legal changes.
So we only have a minute left, and I have 2 questions left for each of you. So I'm going to let you decide which one to answer. The first one was, when do we know that we're in a constitutional crisis? But the other one is, what gives you optimism? So I'm going to let you. I'm going to let you decide what note you want to end this on.
How about both?
Great.
Right? So, are we in a constitutional crisis? This requires an active answer, not a passive answer. We're in a constitutional crisis if we allow it, and we're not in one if we resist it. And what makes me optimistic is that I think this is a failed presidency, and I think it's going to be broadly perceived as a failed presidency. And I think it's going to be comprehensively repudiated. The people always have another move in a democracy. That next move is the midterm elections. There will be another. Those elections will take place. You will make sure they take place. If anyone tried to cancel them, you would be in the streets. And you would do that again, collectively and individually. So So that is the answer to it, a constitutional crisis if we allow it, to paraphrase Ben Franklin.
You guys want-
I mean, I would say, you know, for many communities, the Constitution has always facilitated crisis, and what gives me hope is that I'm part of a community that's, you know, created powerful resistance and art as much as they've been the subject of attacks, and that's where I'm going to turn my energy.
What gives me hope is history. You know, we have encountered and defeated authoritarianism in this country before. We, you know, were a country that enslaved people, and we defeated that institution. We are a country that had Jim Crow segregation, and we defeated that authoritarian, you know, institution. I know that we can do it again. We've done it before. It is going to require that we come together across industry, across sector, across race, ethnicity, gender, that we build that type of broad coalition that stands on the solid footing of our Constitution, of both our civil rights and our civil liberties, as well as our promise to be a collective, positive whole. So that's what gives me hope. We've done it before, we're going to do it again.
Well, Yasmin, Chase, Ben, we know you're very busy, so we're going to let you get back to work. Thank you for all of your work, and thank you for being here today.